We're off. See? Here we go. It has launched the search for the first keyword. It retrieves the Google top diz, and for each of the sites in the SERP, it retrieves the HI and H2 of the page, the quality of the content with a score of 1 FR point, and the ETF, the Majestic ERD with the SEObserver API. Everything will be exported to an Excel file. Welcome to this new video in which I'll show you how to create an automated SEO scraper in just a few minutes using Automa. By SEO Scraper, I mean a tool equivalent to Screaming Frog, for those of you who know it, which enables a website to retrieve a whole host of data, so I don't necessarily need everything. I'm going to concentrate on certain criteria, like the number of HIs on a page, the number of HIs, trust flow, the number of ERDs, the content score with a third-party tool, in short. So, I'm going to do my own little audit, a sort of customized SEO, but unlike a Screaming Frog, we're going to start with a Google search. In other words, I'm going to start with a list of keywords, launch a Google search, retrieve the top 10, and for each site, I'm going to analyze all the criteria I mentioned earlier. With Automa, we'll create the process from A to Z to launch the search and analyze the sites, and in the end, obtain the expected data. The idea here is to show you one way of building a workflow, but with Automa, the possibilities are vast, so everyone can build it in different ways.
So first, I create my new workflow. I'm going to call it SEO Scraper.
That's it. So I've got my first trigger block. First, I'm going to create the table, a table in which I'm going to store all the data I'm interested in. So first, I'm going to record the keyword used in the search, the site, the URL basically, then the number of HIs, the number of H2s, the content score, ETF, and the RDs. That's it. That's all I want to retrieve according to my needs. After that, anyone can add, remove, complete. You really make your scraper to measure. And we start from this base. So first, I need to fill in the keywords to launch the Google search. There are several ways of doing this. You can do it from a Google Sheet, from a file, from direct input via a form. And that's exactly what we're going to choose. It's the easiest and quickest to set up. In other words, in the trigger block, you have a parameters option which allows you to ask the surfer to enter values. So typically, I'm going to ask for keywords. I'll name them keywords in an input field. That's fine. In other words, when the workflow is executed, I'm asked for the keywords. So you'll have to separate them with commas. But since they're separated by commas afterwards in order to create a loop to launch a search on each keyword, we need to transform this list into an array. And to do this, we're going to use JavaScript. We're not going to use it a lot, but we're going to use it a little. We're also going to use variables in this workflow. So let's take a quick look at Automa. Automa's main functions, but don't worry, there's really nothing complex here. It's all fairly basic and logical. So first of all, let's use JavaScript to transform our comma-separated list of keywords into an array. So we use a JavaScript block. No need to run it in the active tab. We don't care. It's all background processing. And so here I've created, using parameters, a variable called keywords, since the name you enter here becomes the name of the variable. To retrieve this variable from the Automa block, we use the Automa ref data function, and you'll find links at the bottom of this page redirecting you to the documentation. So this is our case. So I'm going to retrieve from the variables the one I've called keywords. In JavaScript, I call it keywords2. And to transform this comma-separated list into an array, I use a JavaScript function called split. Now, I'm a 0 in JavaScript, so ChatGPT gives me the solution in every case. So basically it looks like this. Keywords dot split, and the separator is the comma. So we get a new JavaScript variable called keywords table, and I'm going to save it in Automa because here it's created in JavaScript, but it's not created in Automa. They're two different things. So to do this, at the bottom you have Automa, this variable. It's a function specific to Automa that allows you to create a variable. Here I call it keywords table and the value keywords table. That's it. It's logical. This block is always there by default to move on to the next block. So we leave it there. From this point on, I have my table. Now that I've got an array, I can create a loop on it. To do this, I'm going to name my little block to make it more explicit. I like to do things neatly. List to array. Next, my loop. Well, loop data. I'm going to create a loop with loop data. I'm going to name it. So this is the keyword loop. So keywords loop, an ID that we'll use later. KW loop. The ID identifies the loop for all subsequent interactions. The source of the loop is a variable, the one we've just created called keywords table. That's it. From here, we can launch the Google search. So we're not going to bother with the search form, the button to launch the search, because if you've already done the test, when you do a Google search, the keywords appear directly in the URL. So we'll simply use this structure to skip the form search step. So I'm going to open a new tab with new tab and enter the following structure. So here we have the Google URL, classic search question mark Q equals, and behind that we have the keywords. To obtain the keywords, we use mustache syntax. In Automa, it's the syntax for using dynamic data, including variables, loops, and so on. So, what's the idea? It's to replace any spaces with a plus sign, since once again, if you've done the test, in the Google search URL, each word separated by a space, the space is replaced by a plus. So this is exactly what we do to save time and avoid problems. We actually use Automa's internal function, call it replace, in brackets, the source of the data you want to work on. In this case, it's in the loops, so it's in loop data, the one whose ID is KWLoop. And then I replace an empty space with a plus. It's a simple search and replace function. The only subtlety is in accessing the variable we're interested in this case, the keyword. It's in the loop we've just created. And the syntax for using dynamic data in Automa is the source of the data, variable, global data, Google Sheet. In this case, it's a loop, so loop data dot the name, the ID of the loop, which I've named KWLoop. This gives access, since we're on the first iteration of the loop, to the first keyword in the list. The search will be based on this, and I'm going to check these options as well, since we'll be coming back several times to do the search. Instead of opening a new tab each time, we'll update the existing one and wait for the window to load properly to avoid problems. Next, the idea is to retrieve the URL of each result in the SERP. So, for example, we'll go to Google and look at how to retrieve the URLs. Come on, CBD. I'm using Automa's element selector, which allows me to find the right CSS classes to use, or XPath, but most of the time I use CSS classes. The links are there in the titles. If I click on them, I'm not too crazy about it because it looks like random characters. And random means frequently changing. This is deliberately done to avoid scrapping, so we need to try and find values that are a little more static, stable over time. So let's go back and look at the attributes tab. As soon as I see something more stable, I'll focus on it. So no, nothing very stable, no. Either. Data SNF 0. 0 is pretty stable. I'll copy this value and paste it here to simulate. That's not bad, because it targets all the greenhouse results. That's pretty cool. What interests me is the link, as I was saying. It's not all that, it's not the whole block. So quite simply, I'm going to use the A tag. And then, bingo, it retrieves all the links. Here we have it. You see, you have the list of all the elements that correspond, and each time we have the RF there, that corresponds to the different results. So, perfect. I'll use this. And the idea is to retrieve the URL found in the href attribute, which means we need to retrieve the href attribute of each of these classes. To do this, very simply, we have a block specifically for this called attribute value, which allows us to retrieve the value of the attributes. So what do we target? What I've just done, and which attribute? href. And I'm going to create a variable that I'll call link. This way, I'll get the results of the different SERP results. But as you've noticed, if you do that, you'll only get one value. I'm going to retrieve all the values. To retrieve all values, I check multiple. So this will retrieve all the values corresponding to this that have the href attribute. So it's going to create a table for me, quite simply. So I'm not going to call it link, but links instead, since we'll have several of them. So get SERP links, that's it. Here I'm going to name it Google search. Sorry, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I like to do things properly. There you go. I've got all my URLs in the links variable. What do? Like the keywords, I'm going to create a loop to analyze each URL. I'll start with a small block, loop data block. This time I'll call it links loop. And my source is the links variable. So here, that's it. So here we go. We're going to open a tab. We'll update the existing tab with this option. Wait for it to load. And now I'm going to retrieve the loop's current value, i.e. the loop's current URL. The source of the data. Is it variable? Is it Google Sheet? No, it's the loop. So it's loop data dot the name of the loop, the ID of the loop, i.e. links loop. And that's it. This will open the site in question. From there, I'll retrieve the H1, the H2, and the counted. So to retrieve text, plain text or HTML, it doesn't matter. I'm going to retrieve quite simply. I'll use the get text block. So this is for H1. Basically the CSS element, what am I aiming for? The H1. If there's more than one, you have to check multiple. Otherwise, there will always be only one. So I'm going to assign it a variable that I'll call H1. Then I'll do the same with H2. So here, I'm not going to bother. I'm going to right click, duplicate. H2, aim for the H2 and call the variable H2. That's it. Then here, we retrieve the contents of the H1 and H2. I'm interested in their number. So we're going to create new variables. In fact, with the insert data block, which lets you create variables or add data to the array, in this case, Automat. So here, I'm going to count the HN. I'll add a variable that I'll call H1NB, for example. And to count, I use mustache syntax, the getLength function, to obtain, in fact, the length of an array, so basically the number of rows in an array. Which array? Well, the one intertwined in the variables, the variable called h1, and the same with the h2. h2d, that's it. This way I'll get the number of h1s, the number of h2s. Next, I want to analyze the content score with a third-party tool. So Vortex Guru, un.fr, there are lots of them. So everyone does according to their affinities. I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. For the demo, we're going to use un.fr. So new tab, we'll go to un.fr. So I update, I wait for it to load. That's it. And I'll go and see, well, how it works. Because basically on un.fr, that's it. I have to enter the URL here. So what's this field called? Let's hope it has a stable static value. Okay. Well, that sounds pretty good. It's not random, obviously. So let's go with that. I'll copy it. And here, so this is a form. It's a form field. So I'm going to use the forms block. The forms block. This is the class. And I'm going to enter, well, the URL in question. So I'll simply reuse what I've put in to open the site. Loop data, links loop. And that's it. And then to validate, what's next? Well, type Semit perhaps? Oh no, there are two, so now we'll take this one. We'll take this one. Now this is a button to click. I'll just type it in. It's a URL. So it's a click. We click on this button, and that's it. I'll give it a little time to work. Let's say 5 seconds. So it's in milliseconds. So 5,000 milliseconds. Okay. And then we'll just simulate. That's okay. We'll do a test with another site at random. What I'm interested in is getting the score here. So which CSS class? Okay, nothing random about it. So we'll just take what Automa suggests. So this is getText. As with HI and H2, we get a textual value, score, on this CSS class. However, I'm going to add a little subtlety, because I'm only interested in the 63%. The point score, well, that's not a big deal, but you can filter with a regular expression, for example. Thanks to this, it will only retrieve the percentage score. And I'll store this in a variable that I'll call score, quite simply. And that's it. So now I've got my little content score. I'm happy. So what's left for me to retrieve? I still have the ETF and the RD. So to do this, I really like SEObserver, even if it's Majestic data. I could go to Majestic, but I have an SEObserver subscription. So there you go. So now we can do what we always do, which is to scrape the site. We enter the URL and use getText to retrieve the values we're going to obtain. But to show you something different, we're going to use the API because Automa lets you use any API. What interests me in the API are the metrics. Here's the structure of the API request. In Automa, it's not curl, it's HTTP post. So, as I often do, I ask ChatGPT to convert the curl into a post request because APIs are often curl. But once you're used to it, you realize that the elements are fairly easy to identify, but ChatGPT is our friend, so it can make things easier. So, after the score, I'm going to use the HTTP request block. This is the block that connects any API. And in any way you like, so you're not stuck in a template, you can configure the API as you like. So the URL we call is this one. That's it, in post. So here, metrics. Here it is. In the headers, it's here, hashes headers. So here. Is for entering the API key. This is it. Next, you need to give it the contents of the request. So here, basically, I'm going to get the domain metrics, not the URL, but the domain. I'm going to enter this in the body. Respecting the JSON structure, I'll try to do it cleanly. Hop. Oh, there. Now it's a bit easier to read. So item type domain, item value here, I'm going to enter the URL of the site. In other words, instead of SEObserver, I'm going to enter this in quotation marks. The usual loop data dot links loop mustache structure. Always the same structure to get the site link. Okay, I'll assign the answer to a variable I'll call metrics. And finally, the last step, I'm going to transfer all these values because now I've got everything in my automatic array. To do this, insert data, a small block insert data, variable to table. And here we go. I'll start with the keywords column. To retrieve the current keyword, as we saw earlier, at the Google search stage. In fact, we're going to reorganize it neatly, automatically, with this little magic wand. And that's it. It's even prettier. At the Google search stage, we used loop data.keyword loop, KW loop, that's what we'll enter here. This time with mustache syntax, that's it. Next, I enter the URL of the site. We always come back with our loop data links loop. Next, the number of H. This time, the source of the dynamics data is not loop data, but a variable we created earlier called HNB. The HNB is the same. This time, it's HNB. Next, the score. Same thing. It's a variable we've called score. And then here, to retrieve the TF, that's when we analyze the SEObserver response. We have a multi-level table. As it's recorded in a variable I've called matrix, to go down the levels, we add points. In the matrix variable, we go down into data, into 0, and then to the trust flow value. This corresponds to the structure of the table in which we descend to reach the target data. For RD, this time I'm going to target RDs in doFollow, i.e. the value. Rev domain, type follow. That's it. Now I have to end my loops to make sure that at the end of this workflow, Automa starts from the beginning and goes first to the next site in the SERP, and then to the next keyword in the search. You need to indicate the end of the loop. With a loop, breakpoint block, first it's the end of the SERP. The ID was called links loop. This is the end of the links loop. Once it's finished, once we've gone through all the sites in the SERP, it's the end of the keyword search, thus the end of the KW loop. After that, you can do a little CSV export of the table, because you'll have the table in Automa, but it's also nice to have a little export. I'll add it here. CSV export. Export from the table, and there it is. That's it. CSV export. Separator, period, comma. It usually works better than the comma to get the right structure directly into Excel. That's it. I'll do a little automatic alignment. There you go. Now I'm going to tell him that we're not going to leave it running for 2 hours. Let's see how well it works. I'm going to enter 2 keywords. On the other hand, I'm going to ask it to analyze a maximum of 3 sites. We're not going to do them all. This is where you can tell it how many times the loop will iterate. The default is 0. That means infinity. As long as there are elements, the loop continues. In this case, I'm deliberately limiting it to 3 sites. We're going to analyze 3 sites, no more. Finally, I'm going to use the CSV export. As soon as the SERP is finished, because otherwise I'd have to wait until all the keywords had been processed to check that the export was working properly. We'll do this instead. The export will be performed as soon as the SERP has been processed. Here we go. CBD, oil. CBD. Here we go. As you can see, the CBD keyword is searched automatically. It opens the first 3 sites in the SERP. It analyzes the content score. It has already retrieved the number of HI, the number of H2. Now it has retrieved the content score. In the background, we didn't see it because it's an HTTP post request with the SEObserver API. It retrieved the metrics. It's supposed to have done so. We'll see if it worked. At this point, it continues. To analyze the various sites in the SERP, the first 3. Here, he did the CSV export, then it's off. As you can see, it goes really fast. It's brilliant. He started with the keyword oil CBD and followed the same process on the next keyword, analyzing the SERP and retrieving the metrics. Small CSV export. Super. Have a look. Keyword. The keyword CBD was used for this analysis. Sites. Number of HI, number of H2, content score, percentage only. Trust flow, ERD do follow. Perfect. There, you saw it. It did it in seconds. Imagine letting it run for tens of minutes, hours. You can scan hundreds of sites and retrieve all the data you want, whether by scraping or using APIs. I offer you this workflow in my Automa training course. Got it all? Perfect. If not, don't worry. It's perfectly normal. This is a condensed version of everything you'll learn to master in my Automa training course. Since it's aimed at beginners as well as experienced users, you'll learn step by step, progressively, each of the notions you've seen in this workflow, and many more besides.